Matthias Ulungura straddled two worlds, the world of traditional Tiwi society and that of the introduced European society in which protection and then assimilation were the strongly held policies of succeeding governments during his lifetime. Many of his actions throughout his life suggest that he accepted the pronounced ideals of government and mission practices. Matthias was born into the Tiwi community at a time when his people were going through the early stages of social and cultural change. This change, which began with the arrival of buffalo shooter Robert Joe Cooper in 1905, gained impetus with the establishment of the Catholic mission at Nguyu on Bathurst Island in 1911. By the time of Matthias's birth, a small number of Tiwi were employed in buffalo or stockwork on the mainland, while others worked in Darwin or on coastal craft. Another group worked, often on an intermittent basis, on the mission station. Matthias was born at Tuyu on Melville Island in 1918. He came from a family acknowledged for its fighting skills. His paternal grandfather, Paratupawiyiti Tuini Ngaulam, had speared a man in a feud and had taken part in at least one raid on Larrakia country on the mainland to steal women. Matthias's father, Ulungura, the leader of the Yikwani Fire Totemic clan, also took pawn in interband feuds. According to oral history, he was involved in the killing of crew members of a pearling lugger off Panali, Cape Gambia. Matthias's mother, Nellie Wandarabia Piantuyu, belonged to the Manupula band, whose country was in northwestern Melville Island. This band was known for its aggressiveness towards outsiders who landed on its shores over the centuries, including Dutch explorers and the British garrison at Fort Dundas. Matthias, however, was to become a gentle person, possibly influenced by his Christian upbringing. Following a tradition, Matthias was born into his mother's totemic clan, Miatuvi Pandanus, and his father's band, the Mandi Imbula, whose country was Mandiupi in southern Melville Island. Matthias's Tiwi personal name, Opiantiliwait, meant crocodile tail, and his father's name, Ulungura, was adopted in the early 1950s when the mission superintendent, Father John Cosgrove, suggested the names of fathers or grandfathers he used as surnames by the Tiwi people. The people broke with tradition to accept this system. Ulungura had 4 wives. As a consequence, Matthias had 1 full sister and 10 half-siblings, 4 of whom died at a young age. Upon his father's death, his mother remarried, presenting him with a maternal half-brother. During the years of my acquaintance with Matthias, he always demonstrated concern for his surviving siblings. During his younger years, Matthias lived in his father's and mother's countries. With his mother, he visited the mission station at Nguyu, such a visit being part of the Tiwi social calendar. In 1924, about 500 islanders visited the mission, while 20 young Christian families had settled there almost permanently. In about 1930, Wandarabala, Matthias's mother, was asked by Father Francis Xavier Gersel to bring Matthias to the mission for schooling. He became the first Mandi Imbula boy to undertake a mission education. At that time, Tiwi parents were more prepared to allow their sons rather than their daughters to remain at the dormitory school. At the age of about 16, Matthias became responsible for cooking for the small boys in the dormitory. Breakfast consisted of flour soup, or another soup like Uncle Toby's oats. Known originally only by his Tiwi name, upon arriving at the mission, the young islander was given the name Smokey by lay missionary Pat Ritchie. He received the Christian name of Matthias when he was baptized on the 15th of August 1933. Earlier, in about 1925, young Tiwi males who had been resident on the mission station had begun to accept Christianity as an alternative option to customary initiation. This coincided with Father Gel's policy of concentrating on the development of the children as future Christians. Unlike missionaries elsewhere, he took the attitude that the Tiwi must seek baptism themselves rather than this being forced upon them. Consequently, he had waited 20 years for his first conversion. Matthias accepted Christianity for the rest of his life. The young Tiwi, including Matthias, spent their formative years against a background of little government support for the Aboriginal community. As an economic measure, the position of Chief Protector of Aborigines had been abolished in 1914. These relevant duties were carried out by the Territory's Government Secretary until 1919, when control of the Indigenous population passed into the hands of the police. When Dr. Cecil Mick Cook was appointed Chief Medical Officer in 1927, he was also designated Chief Protector. While Cook did much to improve the health of the Aboriginal community, he had little love for the missions. In a practical sense, however, these institutions were responsible for most of the welfare work and training being done among the Aborigines. From the beginning, The mission's policy was one of encouraging self-respect through providing Tiwi people with rations and other desired items in exchange for their labour. This was seen to be preferable to people begging for food or receiving rations without doing any work. Upon leaving school, Matthias gained employment on the mission as a labourer and stock worker. The mission was not in a financial situation to provide a cash component in the payment for work, the government at that time providing an annual subsidy of only £200 for the mission's operations. There was not likely to be an increase due to the financial straits of the Commonwealth government. Matthias therefore looked for a means of obtaining cash wages. The arrival of Joe Cooper in the islands in 1905 had meant that Tiwi people could travel to the mainland on coastal vessels. Before Cooper left Melville Island in 1916, a number of the islanders were employed in Darwin. The movement of the Tiwi increased with canoe travel to Gun Point via the Yemen Islands. Gun Point became a camping site for some of the islanders, especially those from eastern Melville Island. From there, they were able to seek work on cattle stations or in the buffalo shooting industry. In the 1920s and 1930s, canoe travel to the mainland increased in response to a demand for Indigenous domestic servants and labourers in Darwin, especially from among the Tiwi, who were perceived to be good workers. Continuing pearling operations off the Tiwi Islands led to some Tiwi men gaining employment on yugas and other coastal craft. In or after 1935, Matthias worked on lugger D10, owned by a Mr. Clark. However, one rough trip to Croker Island was enough for Matthias, and he sought work on the mainland. Following other Tiwi to Darwin, Matthias worked briefly in a sawmill in Parrop and on the construction of Bagot Road. Suspicions and even enmity existed between the islanders and various mainland Indigenous groups. One day, fearing an encounter with strange Aborigines on his way to work at East Arm, outside of Darwin, Matthias took a long detour. When he did not arrive at his place of work on time, it was feared by other Aborigines and the work supervisor that he was lost or even murdered. In about 1915, Father Gel had purchased Topsy Wuraminingamo, Ungaraman Njamau, to avoid her having to marry a man she did not like. This led to a gradual change in the Tiwi marriage system. As a consequence, when Matthias prepared to marry Marie Assumpta Putumpare, a girl of about 17 years of age, the union was one of free choice, not one of customary arrangement. Marie was the daughter of Goodfellow Work Punguchi and Daisy Perenkeruwayu. Of this own volition, Johnson Pool Pralamatu, a totemic uncle to Daisy, took her as a child to live in the mission dormitory. Marie recalled that food was not plenty. The people used coconut shells as cups and plates, the real items not being available. With the money earned on the mainland, Matthias met his bride price obligation, supplying Marie's parents with a bag of flour, a tin of treacle, a tomahawk, a knife, calico for lap-laps, a mirror, and a blanket. Father Zell had left Nguyu in 1938 to become Bishop of Darwin. Questioned by Father John McGrath, Sale's replacement, and as to whether he approved of the proposed Goodfellow Work replied, Inter alla rura, or you boss, no fight, meaning you are the boss, I will not argue with you. The couple were married on the 30th of December 1939. Like other Tiwi, Matthias and Marie moved into a tiny inverted V-shaped hut of corrugated iron with a dirt floor. These huts, which had to be crawled into, were used as sleeping shelters, most living occurring out in the open. The couple's only child, Marietta Puludingarilla, was born on the 8th of October 1940. Her birth was a traditional open-air one. Although he was told by some Tiwi that he was silly for working for rations only, Matthias went back to mission employment after his wedding. He carried out a variety of jobs. One task came from the presence of Japanese-manned pearling luggers around the islands. The law forbidding the procurement of Indigenous women for the purposes of prostitution was ignored by some Tiwi men. These men had built up a trade in which they'd received ample rations from the Japanese and other Asiatic crew members for the services of their women. The mission was unable to supply rations to the islanders on the same scale as the Japanese were doing. Despite complaints from Zell in the 1920s and 1930s, the Commonwealth government failed to take action until 1936, when the vessel, the Larakia, began regular patrols to the islands and along the Arnhem Land coast. In April 1939, a control base was established at Pularumpi, the Garden Point beachfront, Melville Island, as an added precaution against the trade. Matthias was sent to see if active contact was occurring between pearling crews and Tiwi. At Cape Gambia, Melville Island, he sighted luggers anchored about 1 mile from the shore, and a number of Mandiimbula people camped in the bush in from the beach, but there was no evidence of actual liaison between the two groups. However, a few days after returning to the mission station, Matthias heard that luggers had been arrested in the area of Cape Cambia. By late 1941, a number of changes had been made in Aboriginal administration. A Native Affairs branch had replaced Cook's Aborigines Department, while Bathurst Island had been declared a reserve. In 1910, a lease over Melville Island, in the name of Veste Brothers, did not permit Melville and the smaller islands to be made reserves until 1941. A mission for Aboriginal children of mixed descent was set up at Pulurumpi Garden Point in 1940. In 1941, 89 children were transported from Darwin to the control base at Pulurumpi, and a few months later, a new Native Affairs station was set up at Snake Bay. While the newly created Native Affairs branch struggled to meet its policies and proposals with limited finances, the possibility of war led to the mission airstrip being developed for the Air Force. In 1940, when a two-man military guard was placed there, Matthias gained employment in setting up posts and drum markers along the strip. As the Japanese force moved closer to northern Australia, Matthias and his cousin Jerry Kera Naiua assisted a small group of servicemen to place drums of explosives along the airstrip in case Japanese planes attempted to land there. At 9:30 a.m. on the 19th of February, 1942, Matthias was standing in front of his dwelling when 188 Japanese aircraft appeared overhead. Launched from a naval fleet in the Timor Sea, the force was flying towards Darwin. A radio warning sent to Darwin by John McGrath was ignored. About 6 Zero fighter planes flew down to strafe the mission, destroying an American transport plane on the airstrip and machine gunning buildings, including the newly erected church. In the confusion, Matthias saw a 6-year-old girl, Marie Gertrude Orsto, scramble down a low cliff face to the beach. He looked hold of the girl, hiding her and his family in a small opening in the cliffside. Above them, a serviceman ran to the cliff edge to set off the charges planted along the airstrip, but only one drum exploded. Fortunately, none of the Japanese planes attempted to land. Faced with the possibility of further raids, Father McGrath ordered the evacuation of the mission. Matthias and his family joined other Tiwi in Mandupi, Melville Island. He and the other men were absent from their camp at Tuyu when a Japanese airman walked into the camp, frightening the women and children there. He walked around holding a baby, Clarence Puantulura, until one of the women, Ampula Mumto Munkara, took the infant from him. The airman then wandered away. Various accounts have been written about the capture of Matthias. Some are incorrect and demeaning. From his own account, about 5 p.m. on 21st February 1942, Matthias and the others were camped at Kruru when Matthias observed the airman walking through the trees towards the camp. Telling the others to run from the camp, he circled around the airman and hid behind a tree. As the Japanese walked past, Matthias crept behind him and grabbed his right arm. He seized a pistol from the leg pocket of the airman's flying suit, breaking the neck loop to which it was attached. Stepping back, Matthias said, "Stick him up, right up, 2 hands up." He then called to the other 3 Tiwi men who had been in the camp with him to strip the prisoner and search him. From the actions of the prisoner, Matthias realized that one of the items found on him, a map, had some military value. Thus was captured Hajime Tawashima, the first Japanese prisoner of war taken on Australian soil. After guarding the airman all night, Matthias, assisted by his 3 compatriots, took him to Nguyu the next day. Under military questioning, the prisoner claimed to be a rear gunner from a crashed bomber. Matthias, however, pointed out that he was a pilot, indicating the marks made on the soles of his flying boots by the pedal plane. A group of Mandi Imbula men, including Matthias, backtracked on Melville Island until the pilot's crashed Zero was located. These exploits had a strange sequel when military intelligence in Melbourne telegraphed Nguyu to determine whether or not Matthias was a qualified and accredited tracker. For the remainder of 1942, Matthias patrolled the islands by foot, canoe and lugger for Corporal S.H. Moore of the RAAF Guard at Nguyu, receiving rations and a khaki uniform in return. During this time, he was involved in investigating several Allied planes which had crashed in the islands. Matthias then joined the Army Transport Unit, working as a batman at Larakia. Disorder? Back in the islands, apart from working for the mission, Matthias re-established his garden and erected a fish trap at Paru. The produce was sold to the mission. Later, he used a fish trap to provide free fish for the children and old people at Nguyu. Matthias's bravery in war was matched by bravery in time of danger from the sea and cyclonic weather. His own daughter and wife escaped drowning while crossing from Paru to Nguyu in late 1947 or early 1948. They were rescued by Matthias and Peter De Hare, the mission builder, in the mission launch. In 1963, Matthias saved 6 people when their canoe overturned near Polari Tara village on Melville Island. Later in the same year, he again came to the rescue when 3 Tiwi men and 2 Arunta men who were working at a forestry project on Melville Island, were thrown into Apsley Strait when their canoe. On the 8th of December 1948, a cyclone struck the islands. The small hut on the beach in which Matthias and his family lived was knocked over by the wind. As the gale roared around them, Matthias assisted in the securing of the wrecked American bomber to the school fence. The cyclone died down after 2 days and a night, having brought widespread damage to the mission. Matthias had some involvement in a different type of crisis late in 1949, when a dispute within his family occurred. Kate Karanaiua, a widow, wished to marry Matthias's half-brother Greg. This upset her father, Brian Tipperary Tipiura, and her late husband's brothers. Greg was threatened with death. The couple fled across to Peru in the face of clan arguments in which Tipperary growled at Matthias as Greg's older sibling. Early one morning in February 1950, the couple were married on the mission, but to avoid further trouble, they moved to Penali, Cape Gambia, where a son, Brian, was born. Family problems and confrontations affected Matthias throughout this period of his life. In June 1952, while he and Marie were in Darwin, Marie's mother, Daisy Perinkaruayu, had her arm broken by her second husband, Duncan Ramatinga. This occurred in Bagot community. Duncan was jailed. Not long afterwards, on the 23rd of November, Matthias's sister, Punjaramilla, was drowned. In accordance with local blaming patterns, her son, Timothy Purantatameri, argued with Matthias over her death. Further drama overtook Matthias's family about 12 months later when Duncan was killed at Shoal Bay by Diamond Karanaiua. Diamond was the husband of Matthias's sister, Mary Tipapatu. Released from custody in April 1954, Duncan was placed in Matthias's custody at Peru to avoid retaliation. Following the death of Mary a few months later, Diamond sailed to the mainland and did not return to the islands. And following his failure to persuade his brother-in-law, Pancho Banjo Taro Patterson, to place his daughter Rachel in the mission dormitory, Matthias had to face up to a marriage dispute involving his half-brother Romuald Kurapulamiri Purantalameri. The refusal by Romuald to marry his promised bride, Jean-Marie Tipungwuli, resulted in arguments involving their respective bands and totemic clans. Subsequently, in a free-choice union, Romuald married Alice Kunbuk in 1959. In 1960, however, Jean-Marie was still growling the Mandimbula camp on the mission station. Such a conflict occurred from time to time in Tiwi society, possibly escalated by the social changes imposed by Western culture. In about 1957, Matthias commenced another entrepreneurial venture when he and Marie purchased a wood stove and set up a small bakery at Paru. In a time of emergency, the stove was loaned to the mission hospital kitchen for 3 years. Marie and Matthias did not resume their bread making until the early 1960s. Early in March 1960, an Indonesian prau was beached on southwestern Bathurst Island. Matthias led one of the parties searching for a woman who had been separated from the shipwrecked group. The woman was eventually found by another party. In the same year, confrontation and concern over marriage matters again loomed for Matthias. His niece Una Karanaiua, born about 1950, had been promised to Bosca Bill Wamatakami for $50 in 1959. Bill was then about 6 years of age. Demonstrating his belief in mission policy and judgment, at the request of the superintendent, Matthias conveyed Una from Peru to the protection of the mission. This occurred during Bill's absence in 1960. Upon his anger verbally, Matthias stepped in to quieten him and to stop further dispute. Closer to Matthias was the matter of his own daughter's marriage, indicating that even though he adhered to mission policy, he nevertheless clung to customary traditions. Marietta was not promised to any man, with Matthias saying, "My daughter, she got free will." This led him into an argument with a man who wanted to pay Matthias a bag of sugar to enable his son to marry Marietta. Later, when Marietta and another man, Albert Tipunguti, proposed to marry, Matthias became very concerned. He expressed suspicions about the Tipunguti's band, the Tikalawila, and feared that the Tikalawila might stop him from seeing his daughter again. This concern was still evident for some time after the couple married in 1961. The 1960s brought change to Matthias's life in a number of ways. Employment with the RF in late 1960 was the last time in which he worked in Darwin, even though he earned the friendship of non-Indigenous servicemen there. His rate of pay for those 3 months was $6 per week. In March 1961, he re-established his bakery at Peru, and 2 months later, his fish trap was operating again. The introduction of pensions to institutionalized Aborigines and Islanders in 1960 enabled recipients to purchase produce from Matthias. His income enabled him to be the first Tiwi to own an outboard motor, this being purchased in February 1963 and used in transporting people between Peru and Guyu. On the other hand, his generosity affected his income potential. Even when counselled about this, he was prepared to assist a family with food if its members worked on village development and hygiene. The efforts of Matthias and the other Paru villagers led to the establishment of a local native council on the 19th of April 1961. The council represented the villages of Paru and Polaritara on Melville Island and those on Nguyu Mission Station. Matthias proved to be an active councillor, attending a study course for local councillors in Darwin. In March 1963, at the council's request, Matthias was taken to Darwin for a royal visit, where he was the only Indigenous person in an area reserved for guests on the old Darwin Oval. He was impressed by the Queen and by the Papua New Guineans he met in Darwin. 3 months later, he met Governor-General Lord de Lisle, who visited Nguyu. Having given evidence to a parliamentary select committee on voting rights for Aborigines in 1961, Matthias welcomed the islanders' ability to exercise the franchise for the first time on the 8th of December 1962. On that historic occasion, he acted as assistant at Nguyu polling booth. While Matthias worried about the slow rate of development at Peru, he had other problems to face. In mid-1961, his young sister-in-law, Marie Elizabeth Walakapianu, suffered a stroke while her husband was employed in Darwin. The accusation by his half-brother, Cyprian Ulungura, that Matthias had not looked after Marie Elizabeth during his absence offers an insight into Tiwi thinking. Matthias told him not to use that blame business as that causes a lot of fights. Traditional culture came to the fore a few weeks later when John Packsaddle Tipijawura suffered a stroke while hunting in Mandupi, the country of the Mandiambula Band. Matthias and others who were present at the time carried Packsaddle to Paru. Later, Packsaddle said he had seen a debil. A year earlier, Packsaddle had broken customary law by marrying a woman whose totem was level with his. Members of these totems were not permitted to marry. Matthias had supported the idea of the two marrying, arguing that there was a new law now. Now the Tiwi decided that Packsaddle was being punished for breaking the customary marriage law. During this time, Matthias carried out his duties as a counsellor in a variety of ways. He maintained a watch on Japanese pearling luggers which came into the mission for water, ensuring that women were not enticed on board the vessels. By mid-1963, however, he was clearly tired of arguing with other Tiwi about the need for community development and cooperative projects. He despaired, too, about family violence, stopping a man from spearing his wife. Although he talked of resigning from the council for a while, he did not do so, being elected to a reconstructed body, which met for the first time on the 28th of February 1964. At the same time, he carried out duties as the hygiene worker in Peru. 2 incidents of importance occurred in 1964. First, on the 31st of August, Matthias received recognition for his wartime duties in 1942 through the gift of $133, not an over-generous one, from the RRF. Secondly, like other Northern Territory Aborigines, he ceased to be a ward when, after much debate, the Social Welfare Ordinance replaced the previous Welfare Ordinance on the 15th of September 1964. A year earlier, Matthias had expressed concern about citizenship, saying he did not want it. Commenting about Aborigines, who had gained exemption from wardship under the Welfare Ordinance, he said, "They not know how to look after money, they waste a lot of money and spoil it for everybody." A wild storm struck Peru in January 1965, leaving Matthias and his fellow villagers with rehabilitation work, including the re-establishment of their gardens. In the following week, they conducted a successful search for a villager who got into difficulties while hunting on Melville Island. While complaining of diminishing eyesight and difficulty in walking, Matthias continued to work and to show concern for his people. The introduction in 1966 of a weekly wage of $6.40 in place of the much smaller one previously paid to most workers on the mission gave the Tiwi greater purchasing power. The payment of full pensions in the same year, and later the introduction of training allowances and then award wages further improved the financial situation of the islanders. As late as November 1979, Matthias vocally deplored the problems which arose with the establishment of local drinking facilities and the illegal transporting of alcohol into the islands. He growled, too, at those Mandiambula people who gambled, he having stopped this practice many years previously. Throughout the 1970s, the world of the Tiwi was changing. A new and mainly younger council was formed in 1971, leading up to the Nguyu Council becoming an official local government authority in August 1974. The day of older men in civic matters was a thing of the past. In addition, from 1970, the mission gradually handed over control of the economic projects to Tiwi organisations. The withdrawal of government and most mission personnel from the islands meant that the Tiwi had to recruit replacement staff from the main private sector. Matthias now preferred to live in the relative quietness of Paru. He considered that there was too much trouble in Guyu, in the environment of self-determination. Like many indigenous people in remote areas, he had accepted the paternalistic policies of the government in the pre-Whitlam era. He had also accepted the prejudices and ethnocentrism of some Europeans he came into contact with. On the other hand, he was disturbed about the increasing level of westernization in Tiwi society. Yet he saw a mainstream education as the only way for young islanders to progress. On another level, he was very pleased when the Tiwi were granted inalienable title to their islands under the 1976 Land Rights Act. Towards the end of 1979, Matthias, now on a part pension and with a back condition, talked in happy terms about his fourth grandchild. He reminisced, too, about exciting times hunting and fishing. The Mandi Imbula population was breaking up as some of the residents of Paru passed away and others transferred to Milikapiti, Snake Bay. Matthias did not realize that his life at Paru was coming to an end also. On the 19th of January, 1980, Matthias Ulungura passed away. Matthias was a good and generous man who was always concerned about his community. He was a gentleman, but a brave one. He lived through a period in which traditional society gradually gave way to a level of assimilation when war came to Australia. Matthias, like his fellow Tiwi, demonstrated a preparedness to assist in its defence to the best of his ability. His life exemplified initiative and a commitment to the new while retaining some degree of acceptance of the old. He is remembered not only for taking the first Japanese prisoner of war on Australian soil, but for his role in pioneering the first council in the islands, his commercial initiatives, and his support for his community. Matthias was truly a man who